Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Hello everyone, welcome to the Walking the Shadowlands podcast. Let me be your guide as we take a walk into the realms of the unexplained, of the paranormal, of things that go bump in the night and haunt your dreams.
Your hosts?
I'm Marianne. Thanks so much for joining me today, tonight, whatever time it is, wherever you're living in this beautiful world of ours. Sit back, relax. Let me be your guide as we walk into the Shadowlands together and see what awaits us there. Kia ora everyone, it's wonderful to have you here with me. Today we're going to be looking at cryptozoological creatures and monsters, things that go bump in the night and haunt your dreams. These are creatures of our nightmares and sometimes our waking hours, but are these creatures of the night that terrorize us as kids and perhaps as adults merely the results of nightmares and overactive imaginations? Or the results of parents using cautionary tales to keep their kids safe? Or is there a reality behind them? Certainly most cultures worldwide have their store of legends and myths that persist in many places in the world up to this very day. Legends, or are they really cryptozoological beings like the Bigfoot, Yowie, or New Zealand's own Moiho man? Are these genuine beings or merely cultural legends passed down from generation to generation? Today we're going to explore this part of the Shadowlands, but south of the border, down Mexico way, as the lyrics of a very old song tell us. To discuss with my guest, cryptozoological researcher and author Robert Bitto, the creatures, the legends, and experiences of people from the Mexico region. It's possibly a wee bit scary for some of my listeners, particularly those from near the borders of Mexico and the USA, and those living in the region, for some of whom these are not legends but reality. So the question, as always, is, are you willing to walk with me into this part of the Shadowlands and see what awaits us there? So make yourself comfortable, make sure your lights are on and your door is locked, and let's begin. My guest, Robert Bitto, is host of a popular podcast called Mexico Unexplained. Robert has had over 30 years of experience in Mexico as a student, as an employee for a large multinational corporation, and as an owner of an imports business, Sueños Latin America Imports, since 1999. He was a professional researcher by trade from 1990 to 1993. And in addition to his MBA and BBA, he holds an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. From 2015 to 2016, he served as the San Diego chapter president of Mensa. Robert has written 2 books, Mexico Unexplained and Mexican Monsters. My guest, Robert Bitto. Robert, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm really grateful for your time and really excited to talk to you about your studies and your experiences and your interests. So perhaps for the sake of my listeners, you could begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into your particular area of interest.
Okay, well, I concentrate mostly on Mexico, and I'm an American. And how I got involved with Mexico was first 30 years ago, over 30 years ago now, I was a student down there. And when I was studying there, I was in a very artistic area. And that was always something that I had on the side. I was collecting arts and crafts as kind of a side hobby. And I went back to the United States and I got my formal education. And when I uh, got my education all finished, I was hired on by a large US multinational corporation, and they stationed me in Mexico City and also in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Wow.
And I got to travel all over Latin America, and I collected these arts and crafts and, esoteric type things. And then when I was tired of corporate America, I quit. And that was 1998. And then the following year, I started an import company where I was importing arts and crafts. And I've been doing that ever since. And what I do is I go to really small towns, out of the way places, because I'm searching for unique merchandise. And
Right.
one of my store reviews, someone called me the Indiana Jones of arts and crafts, because I go to the wild, unheard of places to go and find that stuff, that no one else has. So
How
over the
awesome.
course of my travels, I've run into a lot of really strange and interesting things, interesting stories, legends, and I remember when I was back on a plane going from Guadalajara to Phoenix, and I was nestling in my seat with a magazine called Muy Interesante, which
Oh,
translates to very interesting.
very
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's a magazine in Mexico about the paranormal and about UFOs and unexplained things and stuff. And I was flipping through it, and there was an article about crop circles, and I thought, this analysis I've never heard before. I've never seen these pictures before. It, I wonder if there's a lot more to investigate with that topic and everything else. And so I still own my business. I still travel a lot, and I'm going down to Mexico all the time, and I'm uncovering different things. And I've had a podcast for 5 years now, and I've written 2 books on the subjects of cryptozoology, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, and all of that in Mexico. And people would be interested to know that Mexico has a counterpart for almost everything paranormal that's famous in the world. Like they have their version of the Bermuda Triangle, they have 2 Bigfoot creatures, they have a Loch Ness monster, all sorts of things. They've had black-eyed kids, they have crop circles, all that stuff. It's all down there. But nobody really was putting it into English and putting it into, out there on the internet or so that it could reach a broader audience. So then that's where I came in and filled the niche. So that's my elevator speech, I guess, 3 minutes or less.
So, what are the names of your books?
The first book I wrote is the same name as the podcast and the YouTube channel. It's called Mexico Unexplained. And then the second book is called Mexican Monsters, and it just focuses on the cryptids and legendary creatures of Mexico. And people would be surprised. There are a lot of them down there, and there are a lot that you don't ever hear about, like I said, because the literature is in Spanish or it doesn't even go outside the
Right.
country. But because Mexico has had very complex civilizations for thousands of years, there's a lot of material actually from ancient records and all the way through the colonial times and into the modern age. So there's a lot of
Right.
stuff out there.
Right. Right. There is actually. Yeah. And of course, because it's in Mexico, most people wouldn't have access to it, like you said. Very interesting. So, in your travels and visiting all these places, which would be absolutely wonderful, I'm so jealous, so jealous. I spent a little bit of time in Guatemala
Oh, great.
um, years ago, decades ago, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it. I spent about a year there, but I would love to visit some of these little places that you go to and see the real culture, not the tourist side. You know,
Right. Yeah.
you miss out so much, I think, on seeing real culture and experiencing the reality of life outside of the tourist
Yeah.
destinations. So, in your travels, have you ever experienced anything yourself that you can't explain?
Well, it's interesting because one of the chapters in my book, the second book, is about La Llorona. And I don't know if you've heard of her
The
before.
Weeping Lady.
Yes, very good. Wow. I thought I saw her not in Mexico, but in New Mexico. That's where I grew up. I grew up in New Mexico, which is it's in the U.S. It's the 47th state admitted to the Union in 1912. And I grew up in the deserts of New Mexico, and the legend is very strong there. And when I was 9 years
Yes.
old, I thought I saw her. And I
Oh,
saw her with a bunch of other kids when we were crossing an arroyo. An arroyo is just a big dry creek bed. And
right.
through the modern city of Albuquerque has over 500,000 people. It's the largest city in New Mexico. There are arroyos cutting through the city. So they serve, to abate the flash floods that come down from the mountains, because it'll rain, and I've seen this as a little kid. It'll rain 20 or 30 miles away, and it'll be sunny where you are, and then a big wall of water will come down the arroyo. And so that's
Oh,
a lot of people say that that's where the whole Llorona legend comes from. It's to scare the kids, to keep them out of the ditches. There's also
right.
another Mexican and Southwestern legend called the hairy hand, La Mano Pachona. This hairy hand that comes down out of the sky if you wander away too far away from your house. It's kind of the same thing. It's a cautionary tale. Don't play in the
Right.
ditches or whatever. But there's also a very interesting connection that I have in the modern day with La Llorona. There was a movie made about her. I don't know if you saw that. It's
Mm.
called, I believe it's The Legend of La Llorona. Well, I was all excited to go see it. And I went to the movie theater, and I'm there in the theater, just watching the movie like a regular person. And I noticed that there's some of my merchandise from my business in the movie. And
Oh, wow.
yes, only products that are manufactured for me. These are my pieces. And then I had remembered that a year ago, a year before, I had gotten a requisition faxed to me from a Hollywood studio for their prop department. I get a lot of orders and stuff like that. So it
Right.
was like way over a year before. And I remembered the movie was called The Children, but it was a working title for the Llorona movie.
Right.
But when I was in the theater watching this Llorona movie about something that I have seen before, I thought as a little kid, there's my merchandise. It was so bizarre, but that's a weird connection. Like, so
Yeah.
yes, the Llorona, I thought I saw all the other creatures and stuff so far. I haven't had any encounters with the lake monsters or the Bigfoot creature or anything like that. But hey, if I keep going down there, who knows? I might bump
Who
into one of
knows?
these.
So tell us about your experience seeing this weeping lady. I'm a bit scared to try and pronounce it in case I
No,
butcher it
that's
too
okay.
much.
It actually, Llorona means, it comes from the
Yorona.
Spanish word llorar, which means to cry. So what was happening is in the fifth grade, our teacher gave us a treat. We can go to teacher's house to her swimming pool. But New Mexico is a very poor place. and there's no funding for school buses or whatever. So we had to take like 3 city buses to get to her house. And
Right.
her house is in near the South Valley, where there's lots of woods and ditches and old trees that are 300, 400 years old, big cottonwood trees.
Wow.
And between bus stops, we had to cross over a bridge. We had to cross a bridge, crossing over what they called the Han Arroyo. And one kid yelled out and pointed and said, "Look, it's the Llorona." And we saw a woman, an older Hispanic woman, climbing up the side of the ditch. This woman looked like she was 80 or 90 years old. What she was doing there, we but it was so scary but so exhilarating at the same time. We ran away. I got a glimpse of her, so did everyone else. We ran away laughing and we tumbled over each other. It was just like, I never ran so fast in my life, but I was laughing. We were all like laughing because we couldn't believe that we saw what we saw, but
Right.
that was the extent of it.
So, did she appear solid, or
If
was there anything about her that made you think it was the woman?
Well, she was dressed all in black from head to toe, and like I said,
Ah,
she was in her 80s, I'd say. She was a very
right,
old woman. There would be no way that she could get down there. She could not get to
right.
the bottom of the ditch because the bottom of the ditch was probably about um, I'll say it about 9 feet or 3 meters down. Yeah. So
Oh,
there would be no
wow.
way that a
Right.
woman of that age or anyone of that age could probably get down there and climb up. And she was going back up the side of the arroyo. And that's when we saw her climbing out. And now there
Right.
was no way. There are mini canyons.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah, it was impossible. But we all got a vibe too from this.
Mm.
We felt scared. I mean, there was this vibe associated with it. And like I said, we just ran. I never ran so fast, but then we were laughing at the same time because we couldn't believe what we saw.
Right. Of course, and being kids. Yeah, yeah. So I wonder, because she's attracted to children, do you feel in hindsight that she felt the presence of all the children crossing the bridge and responded to that?
That's possible. I mean, that would go straight in line with the stories now, wouldn't it?
Mm,
Because
mm,
she's
mm.
looking for, according to your listeners, in case they don't know the story, we should have
That's a good
prefaced
idea
this
to do.
before, but according to the story, briefly, there was a young woman in colonial New Spain, Mexico, or even New Mexico. Sometimes it. New Mexico used to be part of Spain, and then it was part of Mexico, then it was part of the United States. So it has this long history that kind of blends in with Mexico at one point. So this legend is in different parts of Latin America too. So it always starts in colonial times when there's this beautiful young woman and she's married to a handsome soldier or someone from Spanish nobility, depending on the story. And then
Yeah, yeah,
he is messing around behind her back and she hears the gossip in the village or whatever. And then to get back at him, she drowns her 2 children. It's always 2 children. She
mm,
drowns her 2 children when she throws them in the rushing water. And like I said, these ditches the water can just move so fast in an instant. So she throws her children into the rushing water, and then at the very last minute, she has regrets. But it's too late. She can't
right.
save her children. And so the legend goes she's walking along the creek beds, the arroyos, the canyons, the acequias, little channels for irrigation. She's walking along these water paths, I guess, or little waterways, or where there could be water, dry canyons too. She's walking along these areas looking for her children, and any other children will do. So, yeah,
Right.
maybe, that's an interesting thought that I never really thought of. The presence of children, if you are to believe this story, the presence of children could have evoked or invoked, whichever word, could have brought forth this presence? I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, that was the immediate thought that came to me.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. So, in your research, what is the of all the cryptids that you've researched, what is the one that stands out the most to you?
Well, ever since I was a little kid, I was a big fan of Bigfoot, you know. Um, and so there are two Bigfoot creatures in Mexico. There's one
Right,
that's a kind of skinnier, maybe 6 feet, 7 feet tall, 2 meters tall creature that's kind of shy, and he lives in the jungles. So in Guatemala, they also have that. It's called the sisamite. And Guatemala, Belize, and the Yucatan, Chiapas, and also Tabasco, to Campeche, those states of Mexico, this creature supposedly lives in the forest. And the ancient Maya um, believed in this creature. They saw this
right,
creature as a forest animal like a deer or a peccary or something like that. And so to them, it was a natural forest creature, just a regular creature. Now,
right.
then there's another Bigfoot creature that is much like our North American Bigfoot. It's big, bulky, hairy, just this. The jungle one is skinnier and a little bit
Right.
smaller. This one is just like the North American Bigfoot that you might encounter in the northern part of the state where I'm in now, California. And it's called the Cuatlacas. And a lot of people don't know about Mexico that it has um, unending pine forests in the mountains. There are three glaciers in Mexico where
Oh, wow.
the snowpack never melts. And on two of those peaks, I know for sure, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. Now spell those. Those
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
those two peaks those two peaks they're next to each other, and they have permanent snowpack, and um they have an alpine rescue team that's been trained in Switzerland because it is so
Oh,
snowy and
wow.
the weather is bad up there. And that's where most of the Cuatlacas sightings have happened, and also in the state of Puebla, where the northeastern part of the state really wasn't even explored by non-native people until the 1850s because the
Wow.
pine forest is so dense there. And so that's the territory of the Cuatlacas. And it's cut off from any Bigfoot sighting territories in the United States by about 1,000 miles of, more or desert type terrain,
Right.
because where the borders meet the United States and Mexico, it's very desert. It's not
Mm.
Bigfoot country. But then
No, no, not at
when you
all.
go south into Mexico, a lot of people don't know this. If they've watched a lot of spaghetti westerns, with Clint Eastwood or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Mexico's always a dry, dusty place.
yeah.
But yeah, you would never think that there are glaciers there or pine forests. But you go south, the elevation, goes up. So you're at higher elevation, and then you have those pine forests. And a lot of them are so dense that parts of them are still probably unexplored. And
Wow.
the Cuatlacas, those sightings have only been recently. The name is a native name, and it goes, I forget which language. It's not Aztec, it's not Nahuatl. That's the main language of, the of ancient Mexico, central Mexico. It's
Right.
one of the other fringe languages on the fringe of the Aztec Empire. But that, I think it means something like hairy forest creature. It's descriptive of the creature.
Right.
But
Right.
that was more part of the mythology of those people. But now with modern people going into these areas for logging, and there are squatters who go in there just to live too,
Right.
um, coming more and more in contact with them. So, yeah, that's been kind of interesting to me, some of my favorite research is to look into the Bigfoot creatures, because I had never heard of it before. I've never heard of the Sisamita or the Quatlacus before I started looking into this, before I heard it when I was down there. So,
Right. Oh, wow. And of course, it's found all over the world. In New Zealand,
mhm.
we have several names for him, the most common being the Moi homine, but there are other names. In Australia, he's called the Yowie, but it's the same
Oh, okay.
creature, the
Yeah.
same basic descriptions. So is the Mexican version, is he, I'm presuming the latter one you talked about, I'm not going to try and say that name,
Quatlacus.
Quatlakas?
Yeah, there you go. See, that was good.
You've
Yeah.
just been kind. um, is he aggressive
He is
towards
very
humans?
aggressive. The Quatlacus
Mm,
is very
mm,
aggressive, and then that's the one in the pine forest and the
yeah,
higher alpine regions. The one, the Sisamite, the skinny one in the jungle, is very shy, but the
right.
Quatlacus will throw um,
Rocks.
pieces of lumber. No, he'll throw like a tree at you.
Ah, yeah, like the Bigfoot does in the States as well.
Yeah, yeah. He'll get
Mm.
really, really aggressive. He destroyed a lumber truck. Someone was cutting timber illegally in this
Uh-huh.
vast protected area, and he totally destroyed, he or she, not to confuse pronouns, we don't know. So
Yeah,
the Quatlacus destroyed the truck completely, and they had to hike out of there. And yeah, so that creature is very aggressive. The Sisamite in the jungle is more elusive. And I think the Sisamite has had more contact with humans for a longer period of time. So that might
right.
be the
Which is
reason.
probably why it's so shy.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like a deer. And like I
yeah,
said, the ancient Maya just saw it as a creature in the forest. So
right,
to them, it wasn't like a mythical being, it's part of the zoology. There
right,
were other creatures that are more mythical too, but yeah, that they believe that that was an actual creature. So
right. So, well, certainly the guys who had their truck destroyed
yeah,
knew it was a real creature.
yes,
How
yeah,
scary would that have been?
yeah. Wow, yeah.
And how long ago did that happen?
That was only, I think it was within the past 20 years. It was recent. Yeah,
That's
because,
pretty recent.
the population in Mexico is increasing. I think the average age of people, the average age of a person in Mexico is 15. So they have this big, young, growing
Oh,
population. And so the population is pressing into these areas that were
right, of course.
previously untouched. And
Mm.
like I said, a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of wilderness in Mexico. In fact, there's also a legendary cat that maybe we can talk about later called the Mexican onza that may be a real creature that hasn't been discovered yet because it lives in a very remote part of the mountains. So there could be, there could be creatures that we still just don't know anything about.
Right. Wow, that's very interesting. So, uh, what coming from one onsa?
Well, I the root, there's we in English we have a word for a small wildcat that's not used much. It's called an ounce, like the measure of weight. And
Oh,
that's like old English. And so it
right,
comes from that same Latin root. Yeah. So
right.
yeah, that's where the onça. And in
Onsa.
Spanish and also Portuguese, well, I lived in Brazil, so I know that language. In Portuguese, the onça is like a wildcat. That's just a term they use, but it's with a C with a little squiggly line under the C. That's how they
Right.
spell onça. And if you're nobody's friend in Brazil, they say, amigo das onças. You're a friend of the wildcat, and you don't have any friends, just the cats in the jungle are your friends.
Oh, wow, poor people.
But yeah, the Mexican onza, they believe people who are investigating this, and there's a carcass that's actually being tested right now in Texas, and yeah. They believe that this could be the remnants of an extinct prehistoric North American cheetah.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and it was interesting because when the Spanish first arrived in Mexico City, they didn't come and just obliterate everything. They were they were invited to the capital city of the Aztecs, Tenochtitlan. They were invited by Emperor Montezuma as guests because
Mm,
Montezuma had heard that these strange people who were wearing metal and they were riding gigantic deer had arrived on
right.
these big houses that were moving across the water. And he had heard about that when they landed on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, sent emissaries out to greet him and said, come to the capital city as our guests. So for about 6 months, the Spanish were there in the capital city of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City, and they were guests of the emperor. Emperor Montezuma had a massive zoo, and in the zoo, he had um, a couple of different wildcats. He had a bobcat, he had a mountain lion that has many different names: puma, cougar, mountain lion, same thing. And then
Mm,
he had this third cat that was um, described by the Spanish as a, it was described as a cougar, but with long legs, kind of like a cross between a cougar and a cheetah. And that was an early reference by these conquistadors who kept really good diaries, and they wrote letters back home because they were there for about 6 months before everything went sour. So
right.
Montezuma gave a tour of the zoo, and that was the first time that a Spanish had seen a North American bison. They didn't know even what the heck it was because it
Mm,
was captured in what they think is southern Texas now in the United States and brought,
right.
1,000 miles to the capital city. So he had this, Montezuma had this massive zoo of all these animals. And in there was this cat that people now think is this onça. And people have cited this cat for a long time. And there have been bodies, and like I said, there's now one, I believe it's somewhere at a Texas university being analyzed. And so it's very interesting. It could be a
Very
completely new
interesting.
animal. But yeah, it goes back to what I was saying. There are still remote areas in Mexico, as there are throughout the world. A lot of people think the United States is a big developed country with big modern cities, and that's true. But once you leave the cities, oh boy, you can
Yeah.
get lost.
Yeah.
And there's who
I
knows what's out there.
go on then to talk
Okay.
about the chupacabra.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Oh, what can you tell us about the chupacabra?
Well, that's an interesting creature because we don't hear much about this creature anymore. It was really popular in the 90s, and then it kind of
Mm,
fell off the radar, which that kind of makes me believe that it might not be a real creature. I don't know. Or it could be some sort of thought form, mass
right,
hysteria. I don't know. But it started in the Caribbean islands in Puerto Rico. And
right.
somehow he jumped all the way to Mexico. But what happened, how the chupacabra became known throughout the world, it's from it, it first became known on the talk show out of Miami called Christina. And
Oh,
it's hosted by a Cuban American woman named Christina, and it's broadcast throughout Latin America. It was like the number one show, throughout the hemisphere, the Spanish speaking world, and even into
right.
Brazil too. She was shown there. But she started talking about the chupacabra, and once she started to talk about it, all of a sudden,
Yeah, all of
curiously
a sudden.
enough,
Mm.
the chupacabra started showing up in Mexico. But
Ah.
was it people were imagining it? Was it mass hysteria? Or was the Christina show, did that give people the permission to talk about it publicly? You see what I mean? I
Interesting.
mean, did they now people say, oh, okay, now it's safe for me to tell people what I've seen?
Right.
So it seemed like in the late 90s, right after that show, there was a big, massive interest in this creature. And since then, there haven't been very many sightings. There's been, there have been a lot of cases where there have been mutilated animals, and that has been attributed, those have been attributed to the chupacabra. But as far as sightings go, there haven't been a whole lot of them since the 90s.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. I know I had seen photos of that people had claimed were chupacabra, but were probably dogs with mange.
Right. Yeah. Um, so far, there hasn't been an actual body, you know, from
Mm.
what that meets the description, because
Yeah.
the description when it first came on the Christina show was this kind of scaly, spiky backed
Mm.
creature that may or may not have had hair. But by the time it got to Mexico, it became this hairy creature, almost like looking like a werewolf.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. But I
Interesting.
don't know. I mean, the whole concept of a tulpa, imagining, you know, a creature into existence or a person,
Right.
could
Yeah.
that be at work here? I don't know. I mean,
That's an interesting thought.
yeah,
For those listeners who aren't aware, a tulpa originally was a creature. Now, the X Files did a program on this. And in
okay.
the X Files, do you remember the X Files? And in the
Yes.
X Files, the tulpa was a creature made of dirt. He was a thought form given life, but he was made from dirt.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And he was controlled by the person who created him.
Yeah, you know, there have been people who've tried to create tulpas throughout history and supposedly have been successful. And
Yeah.
someone who almost, well, who claimed he was creating one and was actually seeing the faint image of who he was creating was Philip K. Dick, who was the author of a lot of different sci-fi novels. He wrote Blade Runner, and a couple of
Oh,
other things. And he was going to Disneyland here in Southern California, and he had one of those year passes. You can buy a year pass. I don't know how much it is, but you can go unlimited times. So he was going
brilliant.
every day, and he was sitting at a cafe, and he was trying to create a tulpa. And then someone asked him, "Why do you go there and you stare?" And they asked him, "What are you doing?" He says, "Creating a tulpa." And the guy said, "What are you trying to do? Create Mickey Mouse?" And he said, "No, Walt." He was trying to conjure up a tulpa of Walt Disney himself.
Oh,
And
wow.
apparently he almost made it. He was seeing images of Walt Disney, but it never came to a full form of the person. So interesting little side
Interesting.
story.
And I read somewhere, there was an experiment that was done kind of along the same lines, but it was a group of people who got together and decided that they would create a spirit as an experiment. And they gave the spirit a name and they gave him a backstory and they put this energy into him and he started to manifest.
Was that the
But
Hat Man? Or
no,
what?
no, not the
Okay,
Hat Man.
okay. Because
But
some people
this
said
was,
that's what was happening there too with those kids creating
are you talking about the Slender Man?
Slender Man, right? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah. No, that's totally, totally a made up
yeah,
fictional urban legend.
right. People sometimes ask me about my conclusions about things. I have theories about things, and to me personally, if if the mystery remains, that's okay. I don't
Mm,
need answers. If it's still a mystery and it's still out there, well, that kind of to me makes the world a little bit more wonderful of a place. So I
oh,
don't really, I mean, I like investigating this stuff, but a lot of people really try to press me for conclusions. And a lot of times they say,
right.
hey, you know, I'm not going to give you what I think, or I don't know a lot of times. So, and that's all right. It's okay
And
to
that,
say that we don't know.
absolutely. And I actually like that attitude. I like the idea of there still being some mystery, because mystery makes it exciting for people.
Yeah,
And it makes them want to go out and search and research and understand more. So it's a good thing, actually.
yeah,
It's a good thing if it makes people curious and it makes people question and it makes people educate themselves, and that's not a bad thing in my mind
yeah.
at all. So of all the cryptids that you've researched, what are the, apart from the Bigfoot type one, what are the ones that are most commonly talked about in your experience that you've come across when you're talking with local villagers and stuff?
I would say Alushas, Chaneques, and Nawales. Okay. Now, the Alush and the Chaneque are almost the same thing. They're little elves that live, little people who live in the forest.
Ah,
And you have to be nice to them. You have to ask their permission. They're almost like fairy folk
mm,
in
mm,
the
mm, mm,
British Isles, that you might be familiar with. But they're little people who live in the forest, and you
mm.
don't want to get on their bad side. They'll come in your house and steal your keys. They'll, do all of these different things. And the Chaneque is in central Mexico, the Aztec Empire. And the peoples they were subjugated, they believed in the Chaneque. The Alush is the Maya. And
Ah,
it's interesting because there was a concert that was at Chichen Itza, the ruins, the main ruins in the Yucatan.
yeah.
And the stage was, I think it was Sarah Brighton, who, gosh, I don't remember the
Of the
name.
opera singer,
Yes, okay.
Sarah
Yeah,
Brightman.
I
Yeah, yeah,
think
you're right.
so. I'm not sure. Okay. But there was a concert, and the stage kept getting destroyed at night mysteriously. Some people said it was the winds and all this, but the Maya elders in the region said no, it was not the wind, it's not natural causes, it's the Alush. It's the Alushes. That you didn't ask them permission to build that,
Ah,
all the concert stuff. So that's why it's
right.
getting destroyed. So they brought in some Maya elders to make a ceremony and give offerings of cigarettes, alcohol, little things like that,
Yeah, yeah.
and then ask permission and say, I'm really sorry. And so, yeah, then they built the stage, they rebuilt the stage and everything. And then from that point out, they didn't have any problems. And the same thing happened with a bridge near the airport. And this is very curious. And you can go by the bridge it's near the Cancun airport, one of the busiest airports in Mexico because of it's by the tourist areas. There's a
Right.
bridge that kept on falling down during the construction process. And local people said, oh, it's the Alush. The Alushas are doing this in the middle of the night because you didn't ask them permission. So they brought someone in, and when you're driving, they brought someone in, did the ceremony, gave the offerings to the Alush, whatever, made them happy. And this is another thing they did. You can drive underneath that bridge today, and you will see a little house made out of stone that's under the bridge. So they made a little
Oh,
house to make the Alush happy. And ever since then, no problems with the bridge. So, hey.
that's really
So
interesting.
those are two little people creatures. And then the third one on my list that I said was the most common thing that I've heard when I'm down there is the Nawal. Now, Nawal is a shapeshifter, similar to, and I'm sure you're familiar with this because I've heard you talk about it on one of your shows.
Oh, the skinwalkers.
Exactly. So it's
Mm.
somebody who is spiritually inclined, good or bad, and they turn into an animal. And
Right.
so there are villagers who absolutely believe in it. They can be
Mm.
total Catholic Christians, whatever, but the
Mm.
Nawal is part of their reality. And
Right.
yeah, you'll hear that everywhere. that older woman over there who lives on the outside of town. There's always, it seems like
Yeah.
whatever culture you're in, it's some older person or a
Or,
marginalized person who's living on the outside of town, right?
right.
And so that person's a Nawal. Stay away from that road. Don't go down there because a Nawal is there. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. But so that's a big part of their reality. The shapeshifter Nawal.
Very interesting. And are the Nawal, are they like the skinwalkers where they can create evil and havoc on people?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Same thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, it would be because actually most of the skinwalkers that are like around the New Mexico,
mm-hmm.
Arizona, it's all the same region, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
All the same sort of like Four Corners.
Right.
Area.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in New Zealand, we have our version of the fairy folk. The native Māori calls them, there's two names, the Patiparehe, which are the land ones, and the Ponaturi, which are sea ones.
Now,
Sea
you're
fairy
not
folk.
going to get me to pronounce those names, are you?
I'm struggling to pronounce them. I hope I pronounce them correctly. Yeah, so that's their version of the fairy folk, but they're all over the world. So isn't it interesting that there's a consistency throughout the world of these beings?
Yeah, it
That
really
says a
is.
lot,
It
doesn't
makes
it?
you wonder. I mean, what is the phenomenon behind this? Is it all thought? Like I said before, mass hysteria, tulpas being created, or is it really, are these creatures?
Exactly.
Even
Exactly.
Queen Victoria of England, when P.T. Barnum did a show at court, he introduced two midgets from the Yucatan and introduced them as Alushas, as
Right.
part of the mythical fairy folk. And in Queen Victoria's diary, she even wrote about it, and she was very amused. The Queen was amused at the performance, but she wrote in her diary that they must have a most miserable existence. but they weren't really Alushas. They were just small
No,
Maya
small
who
people.
were,
Right.
P.T. Barnum, the
He was
showman extraordinaire, just did this. But
yeah.
it's funny, they made it the whole idea of that made it all the way to the English court in London.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Now, I don't know if you studied this guy at all, and I'm not even going to, I have no idea how to pronounce that name. The Island of Dolls. Do you know what I'm
Oh,
referring
the
to?
Isla de las Muñecas, the island of the
Is it?
dolls in Mexico City. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I've never been there before, but I've heard about it. Yeah, I've heard of the stories. I've never done a show on it or a chapter in my book, but yeah, I know of its existence. And the next time I go down there, definitely I have to visit that place. But from what I understand, it was just some little girl who started collecting dolls, who was the daughter of some guy who I'm not sure about the complete story.
Okay,
Maybe you
so
might know more than I do.
I do,
Okay, great. All
actually.
right, let's
I
hear it.
was hoping you might know something about. Okay, so apparently this chap lived on the island in one of these canal things because it was a series of canals,
Right.
and he saw a little girl drown and he couldn't save her,
Oh, okay.
and her doll washed on shore, and so he hung the doll up, and then to appease her spirit, he kept hanging dolls around the island. So the whole island is covered with dolls, and some of those dolls are said to have spiritual attachments. In fact, there was a television show done, a ghost investigation show that actually went there, and it actually, well, I don't know if it was set up for television, who knows, but it actually showed one of the dolls making a noise, like talking.
Oh, wow.
And they turned it around immediately after it happened, and it didn't have any like bits in the back that would cause it to make the sound. It used to have one of those, squeeze the things that would make a sound, but it didn't. Yeah. It was quite an interesting story. And then it was said that he drowned. That's how he died, in the same place where the girl drowned. And there was some sort of theory that there was some spirit under the water that
Oh.
caused him to drown.
Well, you know what? It's interesting about Mexico because there are it's kind of like, well, I guess ancient Europeans believe that there were spirits attached to places. And
Yes,
that's what
yes,
they believe in Mexico too. I mean, the
yes,
true indigenous of Mexico believe that there are spirits attached to places. So,
yes.
um, and like I said, Mexico is a place of civilizations that go back thousands of years. So we've had complex civilizations there for a long, long time,
A
and these
long, long time.
beliefs have been around for a long, long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And part of the reason he hung the dolls was for the girl and to appease the spirit in the water.
Wow.
And on the subject of water, in New Zealand we have the taniwha, which is the river cryptid.
Mm.
What water cryptids have you come across?
Well, there is a Mexican component to the Loch Ness monster, and it's called
Right,
the
you did mention it.
Awisut. And it was
Um,
such a powerful creature that there was even an emperor called Awisut. And he
oh,
expanded the empire, and he was, this tough guy. He was physically strong, and he commanded all these armies and conquered all these people. But he was named after this ferocious water creature. And a lot of people don't know that Mexico City was built in the middle of a lake.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Aztecs, when they first got to the Valley of Mexico, they built a city where their prophecy was fulfilled. They were a wandering people until they got to central Mexico, and their prophecy said that they would settle down and build a city, build a temple where they saw an eagle on top of a cactus eating a snake, which is now the
Oh,
national emblem of Mexico. And it's in the center of their flag, this scene of the eagle on top of a
eating.
cactus eating a snake. So, on an island in the middle of a lake called Texcoco is where they saw this scene. So, they decided to build a city in the middle of the lake. So, yeah, the lake was pretty big, and it was runoff from the mountains. It's in a basin, basically, a
Mm-hmm.
valley. And the Spanish, when they conquered the Aztecs and uh, started bringing settlers, and the population started growing, and they were having flooding problems, they decided to drain the lake. So the habitat of this lake creature, the Awisut, was supposedly living in Lake Texcoco. It disappeared, but the Spanish colonial documents have eyewitness accounts of this creature, and what it is some people think it's a gigantic river otter because it
Uh-huh.
had some fur to it, but you had to be careful if you were out in a boat because according to the legend, it would capsize your boat. It had a big prehensile tail that would come and swoop over, and it would knock you out with its tail and then take you to
Oh,
its underwater lair. So it was this ferocious creature that existed in this central lake. And like I said, some people think it's a river otter, possibly a holdover from a prehistoric type creature. They were all bigger back then, right?
yeah.
So, yeah, the Spanish, there were some eyewitnesses in the 15 and 1600s, but once they drained that lake, the habitat was gone. So, no more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They must have been exceptional engineers to be able to do that.
Yeah. I, yeah, they drained the lake, but the Aztecs too were really good engineers before them.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the Aztecs were, and also then the Spanish, and they when they drained the water, because, like I said, the population of the city was growing, and it was the capital of New Spain, their
right.
empire in North America, basically, and so they just had to. They needed more living room, so they just drained the lake. which it's the strangest place to put a city. There's like 25 million people living there. It's on a dry lake bed that still gets muddy, really muddy, during the rainy season. It's in a dry lake bed on a fault line. They have
Yeah.
earthquakes, and then there are volcanoes that are right there. Popocatépetl, when I was down in Mexico City in 1995, it was smoking, and
Yeah.
right now it's erupting too, a little bit off and on. And
Oh.
I've done a show on my YouTube channel and on my website about how UFOs are connected to these volcanoes. So that's another interesting topic. And then that
That's
ties into
right.
the Quatlacus too, because there have been some Quatlacus, the bigger, more aggressive Bigfoot. There have been some sightings of the Quatlacus in conjunction with UFO sightings on these big volcano mountains. So yeah, it all ties together.
In Australia, the same thing. I was speaking with a Yowie researcher in Australia, and he was saying that quite often UFO sightings are in conjunction with the Yowie. So that actually ties in very nicely. And I remembered the name of that volcano. I'm not going to try and pronounce it for a reason, and it's because there's often videos of UFOs entering and exiting it. That's
Well, the
right.
Mexicans, they shortened the name of the volcano to Popo. So that's easy.
Popo. Oh,
Popo, because it's Popocatépetl. You have to put the accent on the tepetl. That means mountain. Yeah, so Popocatépetl, and it's next to Iztaccíhuatl.
and that's not spelt anywhere near what it's pronounced as, is it?
Right, right. And because the volcano has been erupting, because Popocatépetl has been erupting, the snowpack has melted off of it. But the mountain next
Right.
to it, Iztaccíhuatl, that's been a dead volcano for many, many years. So the glacier is still there on that one.
Wow, that's really very, very interesting. So is Mexico prone to flooding then? Mexico City? One would think it would be, given it's in a valley like that.
Yeah, it floods there, yeah, quite often actually, yeah. And then
Yeah,
with an earthquake, with the unstable ground, I mean, it's a
yeah,
recipe for disaster. But some of the earthquakes have been really bad. There was one in the mid 80s, and you can
yeah. I
still
remember that.
see buildings that I was eating in a restaurant where the tables were all angled and the chairs because the building was leaning over. And
Wow.
yeah, so they did everything they could to stabilize the building. And I think the building was made in the 16 or 1700s. So they weren't going to demolish it. They just tried to do the
Right.
best that they could do. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That would have been a freaky experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Southern California, so we see earthquakes every once in a while. I was once in a high rise in downtown San Diego, and there was a small tremor, and the building went whoosh, whoosh. It just like whipped to one side and went right back into place. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
weird.
We get a lot of earthquakes here in New
Oh, you
Zealand.
do
In
too?
fact,
Okay.
Anya, what was your first book about? What was it called again?
It was called, the first book is Mexico Unexplained, and it has
Right,
all of the different categories, that a little bit of everything in that book, since it was my first book. So it has
right,
cryptids, legendary creatures, it has religious curiosities, it has obscure history, it has ancient mysteries. So it runs the gamut. The second book is the one about the monsters, and that's more specific to cryptids and legendary
right.
creatures. Yeah.
In your monsters book, what is what stories have people told you? Let's get onto some stories.
Okay, the most popularly referenced story, I think, in the monsters book, there's a creature called the lechuza, and that's a gigantic owl. And there's a story that goes way back into Mexican history of witches who shapeshift into gigantic owls and swoop down and kill people, take their dogs, whatever. And if you shoot the lechuza, then she'll turn back into this haggard witch, you know. But it could be a cryptid. And in fact, I had one of my listeners say, come down to South Texas. There are a lot of sightings in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. Come down to South Texas. We'll go lechuza hunting. We'll go lechuza watching because we see these all the time. Gigantic owls that are 6 feet, 2 meters, 6, 7 feet, 2 meters tall. And they whistle and they make other sounds to lure you outside, and then that's where when they attack you. And so in northern Mexico and southern Texas, that is probably the most popular show that I've had that has the most comments about from eyewitnesses. Oh yeah, we've seen this attacked my truck. It's unbelievable, actually, which leads me to believe that, you know, the legend of the witch turning into the owl aside, if we just put that aside for a while, there could be a real creature, a real bird that's that big. In North America, North American Indians, even through Canada, they've had this idea of a thunderbird, a gigantic raptor, So could there be a huge bird that lives in northern Mexico and southern Texas? Probably. There's a lot of uninhabited land. They're mountains. They're very, very remote. It'd be easy, like we said before, with other creatures. It'd be easy for a big bird like that to live undetected.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And in New Zealand, we had what was called the housed eagle, which was a massive, massive bird. It's extinct, but there are it was a physical animal that was here at one time, and it was a massive bird with a wingspan of I don't know how big, and it apparently could lift up small children and small, sheep and stuff like that. No worries about taking it off. So I've got no doubt that these animals existed as animals, legends aside.
Right.
And I think that's the thing when you're looking at cryptozoology, isn't it? You have to take away the emotive aspect of it and just look at it like an animal that existed or perhaps still exists.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like I was saying, in this case you have to take the witch part out of it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Say, okay, what are these people seeing? That I think was the first cryptid that I talked about where I actually thought, hey, this could be a real creature. That was one of my earlier shows, but I kept on getting messages and comments in my comment section on YouTube about, you can go to that show and read what people have been writing. It's amazing. Someone even said that they saw one here in Southern California near the San Onofre nuclear power plant. And when he was a little kid, and his dad said the owls grew really big because they were eating radioactive rats that were coming from the power plant. But yeah, so
that's as good a theory as any.
Yeah, add that to the list, right?
Oh, that's quite fun. Oh, I shouldn't laugh. Well, isn't that how Spider-Man became Spider-Man?
Right.
He got bitten by a radioactive spider.
Well, you know what? It's a modern twist, right? It's what we would say now. 1,000 years ago, they said it was a witch, a marginalized woman who was shunned by the community. That was the reason. Now it's radioactivity.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very interesting, though. And the owl actually popped up in the Skinwalker episode that I did. In the first episode of the Skinwalker, this person was visiting Arizona, some village ruins in Arizona where skinwalkers are known to inhabit, and she saw this owl, a big owl on a huge owl. And she said she felt funny and a bit dizzy or something like that. And then she went to the ranger station for something, and she was telling them about the owl she saw, and they immediately sat her down, gave her some herbal tea that was a spiritual thing, and said to her, "This is what you experienced."
Wow. Well, you know what? Some people think too that it's a screen memory that's implanted later that from the grays, the nefarious grays.
Yes, yeah,
And so there's that connection too. So I
yes.
don't know.
That's actually when you brought up the owls that popped into my mind, that it is often used as a screen image
Right.
by that particular species, but not always. So, of everything that you've researched and you've studied and you've heard about, what is your very favorite?
Well, wow, wow. What is my very favorite? Ooh, geez. That's a tough question. Well, probably the Bigfoot creatures. Like I said, I would love to
Yeah.
go down there on an expedition. I know you interviewed a Bigfoot hunter once. That was a very interesting show, by the way. Um,
Oh, thank you.
but there hasn't been any sort of Bigfoot research in Mexico that I know of.
Well, that'd
Maybe
be
there is,
interesting.
but I don't think so. But I think I would really like to go down there on an expedition and actually look for one of these creatures. But I think that's probably my favorite, uh, either or of those two Bigfoot creatures that are down there.
Right. And do you hold the theory that some do, that Bigfoot's actually an interdimensional creature because he can appear and disappear? Or
And
do
there are
you
no
feel like he's
bones.
a, and there are no bones? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, oh, geez, are there different dimensions? I mean, we can go down so many roads with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Is it
yeah.
all a projection of your thoughts? Once
Mm.
again, is our mind more powerful than we think it is? Are
It's a
these
good
creatures
question.
really projections of something? I don't know. It was interesting in April of this year, 2020. I know your shows are evergreen, but I'll say, this year, 2020, April of this year, there was a small town in Mexico called Coita that was plagued by werewolves. And that is not part, it was a European type looking werewolf, that
Yeah.
whole thing, from ancient Europe. It wasn't anything from Mexico's ancient past, the indigenous people's folklore, nothing. They were seeing werewolves. And there were Mexican psychologists and psychiatrists who were theorizing that that was near the beginning of a really strict lockdown for COVID-19 in Mexico. And this
Mm.
town, they were thinking, because they were all stuck at home and they were all scared, that they were collectively manifesting these creatures.
Mm.
Yeah. I
Interesting.
mean, that happened April of 2020. That's something recent. And
Oh.
it plagued this town for about a week. These werewolves, there were tracks. There were a lot of people had sightings. There was no photography, no fur, nothing, just the tracks. And I think someone recorded some sounds. But yeah, that was interesting. I don't know. Like I said, is it manifestation, or could this have been like a Bigfoot creature or whatever that went into the town and people just assumed it was a werewolf? We don't know.
Good point. Because people were in lockdown, so the streets were vacant of people.
Right? Yeah.
Like in so many videos in towns where there are lockdowns, and I forget what it's like for you guys out there, because here in New Zealand we're very isolated geographically, and so we're just pretty much living our lives as normal, very much.
That would be nice, I'd have to say, because right now in California, it is not like that. Believe me. Oh my goodness. Luckily, my business of 21 years is all online. I had a
And that's
store.
fortunate.
Yeah, I had a store for 10 years and then I closed the store down because I was realizing I was selling more things online than I was inside the store. In fact, one day I I was looking at my sales figures and I said, I sold more in Australia than I did to people who walked in the door. And then so I closed the store down after 10 years and I've been exclusively online for 11. But yeah, so um, I'm still working and everything, but everything else, everything around me is shut down and businesses are
Yeah,
closing and everything.
yeah.
That's pretty bad news.
It is bad news, and so there's a lot of fear out there for people, and so it's understandable. One last subject: are there any like Mexican stories of vampires?
Yes, there's a very old story, and it's a story from a small corner of a small state in Mexico. The state is called Tlaxcala, and it's near Mexico City. There are 32 states in Mexico. When one of the smallest, if not the smallest, I think, is Tlaxcala. And in the 50s, there was a functionary, someone who was working in the government offices in the capital city of Tlaxcala City. And he was noticing on the death certificates that were crossing his desk, the death certificates were saying cause of death, chupado por la bruja, sucked by a witch. And he told his superior, he says, what is this cause of death, sucked by a witch? What is this all about? And then so his supervisor said, we've got to send some people to these rural areas to investigate. And so they went out to these rural areas and they found that there was an indigenous legend that goes back thousands of years of a vampire that goes after newborns and toddlers, and it's called the Tlahuelpuchi. And I won't get you to say that. Um, and so it's a shapeshifter, once again, goes out at night, just like a vampire, and then it will get access to your house by turning itself into another creature like a fly and fly in some crack in your door, the keyhole or whatever, and then appear in the baby's room and then, do the vampire thing and then leave. And
Oh,
then there are marks left on the neck, just like a classic vampire. And so that was being listed as an actual cause of death up until, through the 50s. And people still believe that that goes on, that there are these blood sucking witches, basically, that can
wow.
shapeshift.
So, and they only affect children, not
Not
adults,
adults,
or
always children, usually children who are like under the age of 2. But then some people have said, well, um, this just explains crib death or sudden instant
I
death
was just going to
syndrome,
say,
whatever.
right,
But
right,
it's based on a legend that goes back to, like I said, thousands of years.
right. And cryptid doesn't leave marks on the neck.
Right. Yeah. So who knows, right? Once again,
Very, very interesting. So, where are you going from here? What's next for you? Once COVID's all sorted.
well, the whole COVID thing has put a stop on my travels. Okay. I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
travels planned for this year, 2020, but I almost made it back to Brazil in May, but then they pulled the plug on that flight and they locked
Yeah.
down Rio and all of this stuff. And so I couldn't travel. I was going to go to Guatemala too, and then another Mexico trip, Central Mexico. All the trips were canceled, the flights were canceled, everything. But that
Yeah.
didn't stop me from doing a weekly show because I have 220 shows out there now, and there is
Wow.
a never ending supply of material,
True.
never ending.
True.
Because, like I said, a lot of this stuff is purely in Spanish, And a lot of it has not even left Mexico. You can't find it on the internet or anything. So
Yeah.
there is a never, I mean, what's in my future for this? I don't know, 2,000 more episodes because there's always something else. And when I'm researching things, I'll stumble on other things. And then I'll have people
Right.
send me people who are living in Mexico or Mexican Americans who've gone back and forth, because the border is very, very fluid. It's not, a lot of people don't think of it that way, but people who half their family is born on this side of the border, half their family is born on the other. They spend 5 years there, 10 years here. They go back and forth,
Right.
whatever, citizenship doesn't matter. So I have a lot of people who are, who go and travel across the border and go to these little towns and stuff, who contact me and say, well, I
Right.
spent the summer with my grandma and she told me this. And then that sets me down another path of discovery.
Right.
And so there's never ending material. I don't know what I'm going to be talking about 3 weeks from now. I could find something incredible. Like, for example, I stumbled on the case of a woman called Marla, and she lived in the late 60s and early 70s, and she was an experiencer. She was a contactee.
Right.
She was the most famous Mexican contactee in the history of Mexico. And the only way I found out about her is because I stumbled onto some pulp magazines from the 70s, the early 70s, some pulp magazines from Mexico written in Spanish. And her face was everywhere, her interviews with her and stuff. And it's like, why haven't I heard of her on the internet anywhere? And so that was my source
Wow.
material. And she was mentioned a little bit here and there, nothing in English. That's something I stumbled on, and this was like a gold mine of information. So
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to be finding, but that's what keeps it interesting. And I'm super, super busy
Okay.
with my business. Everybody's in lockdown, so everybody's ordering things online. I'm having the best year of 21 years right now because of that. Which
Wow.
I'm very, very lucky. I'm very fortunate. I'm very, very grateful, because I
Yeah.
know that most people can't be saying that, especially here
Yeah.
in Southern California. Unemployment is 20% or whatever. But
Yeah.
despite the fact that I'm so busy with my business, I still manage to have time once a week to make a show, because there is so much interesting information. It's never
Yeah.
ending.
And so I suspect there's another book coming as well.
Yeah, the last book took a lot out of me. So I did, I did that. That came out 2 years ago. So yeah, that took a lot out of me. In fact, I was on a show. Uh, I was interviewed like a few days after the book came out, and they asked me, well, when's your next book? And I let out a big sigh. And I said, no, I don't know if I want to do this again. But I will. It does take a lot to put together a book, but it's in me. I'm going to probably do another book. I don't know what I'll be doing. Maybe something about ancient beliefs, if the Aztecs, the Maya, tie it all together. I don't know. We'll see.
Actually, that's a great
Yeah, we'll see.
idea.
There's, like I said, unending material.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of the same with my podcast, because I
Yeah,
cover all those
yeah,
areas. There's just never going to
yeah.
run
You're
out of
never
stuff
going to
to
run
talk
out. Yeah.
about.
The
Never
world
going
is
to
a
run
big,
out. There's,
mysterious place. Thank goodness.
isn't
It
it?
makes life so much more interesting. I mean, if I
It
had to work
does.
7 days a week just doing my business, I love what I do. I, deal with arts and crafts mostly with my import business. So I'm surrounded by lots of really cool merchandise. And, like I said, I get to travel and everything. But the whole Mexico Unexplained thing, it really gives me a lot of spice, and
Yeah,
I'm learning all the time. I'm learning along with my listeners and viewers. And you know what? I love the comments section on YouTube, because I have the right to learn too, and I learn a lot
yeah.
from people contributing and sending me in stuff and everything. So I really appreciate that part of it.
I also find that I learn so much from my guests
Mm-hmm.
and from the research that I do for the
Mm-hmm.
shows. It's really, I really enjoy the learning and I soak it up like a sponge. I love it. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
think you
yeah.
can ever, it's a curious mind, you've got to have a curious mind, I think, to do what we
Yeah.
do, and, and a desire to share that with other people. So where can my listeners find you? Now, I will place links to all your social media and to your websites on this episode's page on the podcast website, which is www.walkingtheshadowlands.com. Where can people find
It's
you?
really simple. MexicoUnexplained.com. That's a place where you can go and you can see all of the all the episodes are for free. There's no paywall or anything. You can order books from there, and then there are links to the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is basically a slideshow set to the podcast, so you'll get some visuals there, and it's the same name, Mexico Unexplained. So that's all you got to really do is plug into your favorite search engine, Mexico Unexplained, and I'll pop up.
Brilliant. And are you on Instagram or Twitter?
I'm on Twitter and I'm also on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I had to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah,
There's too
yeah.
much,
I
too
know. Our
much
social
social
media is
media.
so
Oh
hard.
gosh.
I know. Everybody I speak to says that, social media. But
It's an age thing, I think. I mean, I'm not 25 years old, so that's part of the problem, I think.
yeah, my kids do it. Sweet, no trouble for them. But honestly, I find it such a struggle. So, your Facebook page is the
Yes,
same
it's
name
Mexico
as your
Unexplained.
website?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mexico Unexplained. That's very easy for people to
Right.
find you. So, Robert, I've really enjoyed my conversation with you. You're a very interesting chap, and that is taking time away from you. Look, I can see all your work piled
It's
up
such a
behind you on
mess.
your
Yeah.
desk.
This is my office and the warehouse is that away. So all of the crafts and stuff, mostly I have thousands and thousands of pieces of stuff. And it's
Oh,
all over
wow.
there. And yeah, so
What's your business
it's,
website? Because I want to go and
my
have a look at it for
business is
myself.
called Sueños Latin American Imports. And you can find me on Amazon, eBay, Etsy. And then I also have my own website called sueñosimports.com. But most of my merchandise is either on eBay or Etsy. So those would be good places to find me. So yeah, Sueños Imports there. And Sueños means dreams. And yeah,
Thank you. That's what I was going to
yeah.
ask you.
So because everything that I sell was once a dream, once an idea of an artist or a crafter. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's
so
lovely.
it was once a dream, and now it's a physical thing that I sell. So yeah, that's where it comes from. And it was always a dream of mine
Oh,
to start a business like this, and it's been going now for 21 years.
and you're doing really well. Oh, that's awesome, Robert.
Surprisingly, I'm
Yeah.
just very grateful. I really am grateful for everything this year. It's turned out to be a good year for me. So yeah,
Surprisingly, considering, yeah, you're just but attitude, I believe, even in the time of adversity makes such a big
it's really
difference.
strange though, because in other times of recession or near depression, the housing crisis, the dot-com bubble, whenever the population as a whole when they have less money, they don't buy what I sell. I'm not selling bread,
Yeah.
eggs, or gasoline. I'm selling extras. But it turned out that this year, because people were stuck at home, they wanted to
Mm,
brighten their apartment, brighten their home. And then,
yeah.
especially in the first few months, I sell a lot of religious items. I was selling a ton
Right.
of religious items
I
in
can imagine.
in April, May, and also I had a really huge backstock of the Mexican bingo game called Loteria. And people, because they
Oh,
were home, they were looking for things to do. And I had such a backstock that I was the last one standing in the entire country that had any of these bingo games left. I had hundreds and hundreds of them in
Wow.
backstock. And so I was selling more games. I'd say I was selling more bingo games in a month than I would in 3 years. And yeah, because
Wow,
people
that's
were
pretty impressive.
rediscovering playing
Right.
this game probably from their childhood or whatever in Mexico, or their grandma used to play with them or whatever. It's a picture bingo game. So I was selling a lot of those bingo games and a lot of religious things like rosaries and things. I think people were praying a lot. But
Wow,
yeah, but I
understandably,
was very
understandably.
surprised because when the first lockdowns happened, I said, I'm probably finished because people are not going to have any money to buy the things that I'm selling because, like I said, they're extras. But during this time, people want the extras, the colorful little
They want the
sculptures,
comfort.
the happy skeletons, for Day of the Dead, that sort of stuff. They
Yeah.
wanted these things to brighten their homes. And I always include an insert to try to brighten people's days too, in the things that I pack, the orders that we ship out here. I have a nice little uplifting insert because what I
Oh,
noticed is
nice.
I was having people who were stuck at home or who were affected by all of this in a very tragic way. They were reaching out to
Yeah.
me after they were buying from me, and they were telling
Oh,
me how much this thing that they bought from me meant to them. And you know it it was actually amazing to me, the feedback I was getting from people from all of the little
yeah.
things that I was selling. I had no idea that something like this would ever happen, you know.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That actually was kind of close, but it actually brought me on to another thought. Have you ever had an item that's come into your possession that's haunted?
Ooh, yes, 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 yes. One time you know, I, I had a woman who was selling to me when I had a retail store, and she was the granddaughter of a witch, and
Oh,
she had all of these healing properties and stuff like that. She was a very weird, a strange character, someone who would live on the outside of town, like we were talking about. But
right.
she said, "You need to be burning incense in this place. I can feel the energies of some of these things, these dolls that you have, these sculptures. They were made with feeling and meaning, and you need to be burning sage, and you need to be doing all this stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever, blah blah blah, whatever." And then a few weeks later, I opened up the store with an employee, so I have a witness. There was one piece of merchandise. It was a sculpture. It was a storyteller sculpture. It was a seated woman telling stories with an open book with cats. She was a cat lady that had like six cats, one on her two on her shoulders, and just the cats were like listening to her read. That
Right.
sculpture had moved on the shelf about 1 foot, and it had moved all of the other clay pieces on the shelf away, and there were some on the floor. Okay. Yeah. There
Oh,
was
wow.
stuff on the floor. And my employee was like, "What are you doing? You're trying to trick me or whatever." I said, "No, you came in when I did right here. I didn't do this." And it was as if something happened in the middle of the night to move the sculpture and to knock out the others that were on the shelf. And then I said to him, "You think I'm going to ruin merchandise like this? This costs me money. There's stuff on the floor that's broken. You think I would do that just to scare you?" Or something? No.
Well, good
But,
question.
and then that wasn't the first time, too. I'd have things fall off the wall. Um, and yeah, some things did happen, but like that woman, the granddaughter of the witch, said, you don't know how some of this stuff was made, with what intention is behind all of this. And she said, you need to be burning some sage and doing some things to clear out all the bad stuff that might be in here. So, yeah, that's an interesting question
That's
that you
it.
asked. That's a good question. I can't explain
Yeah.
any of that. The stuff falling off the wall, the things moving, and just weird things. There was one. I had a Virgin Mary sculpture made out of wood that turned colors. It turned red and green, and I mean it was just some bizarre stuff had happened. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, more unexplained stuff.
But that was actually a really valid point that that woman made about you don't know the intent that it was made with, and that's one of the things that I discuss is that very often spirits can be deliberately attached to items. Most often it's ceremonial masks. Like, is it the Zuni people, the Zuni Native Americans who have the ceremonial masks, and when they wear them, they take on the character of the entity that the mask is made for.
Yeah, and I've had my share of masks too. And I had a woman come in. I had gigantic masks that were made from this tree, huge old trees that were all cut down in central Mexico. So the masks were pretty rare. They were massive. You couldn't wear them, they were huge. And a woman came in. See, I have had a lot of customers in my store too who are very intuitive or psychic,
Yes.
or in the case of this woman, had a lineage of witchcraft or whatever, alternative healing and things like that. And a woman came in and she said, you've got to get rid of these masks. There's just such a bad vibe from these masks. You've got to get rid of them, and you got to make sure that you get rid of them permanently. And it was like, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, they can't come back to you. And I didn't understand what she meant. And it was funny because the person who bought them all, there were 14 of them. Some guy came in, some hotshot finance guy, this young guy came in and bought all of them. And then 2 years later, he got a divorce and he had to move out of his house. And his wife didn't ever like those masks. And so they came back to me. He sold them back to me for half of what he paid for them. So I put them back up again. And then I sold them to another person, a guy in Canada, and I sold all 14 of them. They never came back to me after that, though. But yeah, some people would come in and tell me. One woman came in and said, you've got to move out of this store because I feel like whenever I come in here, she said, I really like your merchandise and everything, and you're a cool guy to talk to and stuff, and everything is cool. But there's something about this building. I feel like the walls and the ceiling are coming down on me when I come in here, and it's a little bit colder in here than it is outside. There's something evil about this building. And let me tell you, I moved out of that building, and it was 6 months. I waited until my lease was up. I was held up at gunpoint and almost killed in that building. And yeah, I was tied up, and a customer found me and stuff. And I then moved to another location that was brighter, it had sunlight and everything. And that woman came back and she said, oh, I'm glad I found you. She said, I'm so glad you moved out of that building because it was just such a terrible vibe. And then I said, you know what? You were right. Something really bad happened to me. And I told her about the armed robber and all that stuff. And she said, well, you know what? That doesn't surprise me because that's the feeling that I got from that building. And um, apparently, the tenant who was before me in that building, a homeless woman came into that business and said, you all need to leave. There's something bad here. There's something bad. You all need to leave. You're all going to die. This is a terrible place. Yeah. And then she left. And I heard that from the the previous owner. So I don't know if there was something bad attached to that building, but I don't know. But I moved out, so
Interesting.
yeah.
Very interesting. Whoa, that's a bit scary. And it might not have been the building, it might have been the land it was on.
Yeah, that's true. It was in Central Phoenix. There was something else that happened at that building too, which was the weirdest thing. I was being visited by an eagle that had 1 foot that would roost in the billboard that was above my building. And I called the animal control people and I said, there's an eagle. I mean, this is in America. Phoenix is America's seventh or sixth largest city.
This is,
It's a big
yeah, yeah.
city. There are millions of people there. Why is there an eagle in the middle of the city? And I called them and they said, well, there's nothing we can do. I mean, that's kind of unusual. It was a golden eagle and it had 1 foot. And so I guess it was eating roadkill or something, but it would be on that billboard. And then it just went away one day. And I was like, gosh, I really liked coming into the store and seeing that eagle, whenever I could. Sometimes it would land in the parking lot too. It was huge and it had 1 foot.
Um,
And something weird happened. There was a customer I had who was Native American. She was Yaqui. And she told me, she said, I'm going to send you the eagle again because it hasn't been there for a year. And her name was Jeanette. I'm going to send you the eagle. And I said, oh, yeah, right. Ha, 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 whatever. And so I had a fountain in the middle of my store and I had the door open. And uh, the next day after I had that phone call from Jeanette, I'll be darned. What happened is a pigeon came limping through the door and hopped up onto the fountain and took a drink. And the pigeon was injured and then it just hobbled back out the door. And so I called up Jeanette and I said, ha ha, ha, your fairy wand is not working properly. I didn't get an eagle. I got a pigeon with, I think, a broken wing or an injured foot. And then she said, well, that's close. And then I hung up the phone, ha ha, whatever. The next day, the eagle was back. I know it was
wow.
weird. And I have witnesses. I have witnesses to that too. So yeah, a lot of strange stuff.
Wow.
And then what do
It's
you do with
fascinating.
that? You just enjoy the
Yeah.
wonder. That's about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. Wow, that's really interesting. So whatever happened to that ornament that moved the things? What did you do? Did you cleanse it? Did you cleanse your building? What happened?
You know
Did
what?
was it just the one thing?
What did I do? Well, I had him with a teenage boy working for me. I had him clean up the mess and then we just rearranged the shelf. I didn't do anything with it. I really didn't even think twice about it. I don't know.
Oh,
I
wow.
know that's kind
And
of
nothing else
weird.
happened?
It's kind of weird thinking back at it now that I didn't do
Mm,
anything with it. But
that is
yeah, but
very,
I guess I was, you know, I, I'm in business. It's a store. I was thinking about money, whatever, and just put it back on the
yeah, yeah,
shelf. So I don't know where that
yeah, yeah,
where that sculpture ended up. I know in my inventory now, I don't have any more of those uh, storytellers with the cats. Those were very popular. So I know I still don't have it here. So it didn't come with me.
so it's really interesting that, well, of course, you wouldn't be looking for anything paranormal because that's not on your radar. It's just, but it's interesting that nothing else happened after that that you were aware of anyway.
Connected to that sculpture? No, not as far as I
Mm,
know. But those were
mm.
popular little sculptures because they were nice.
So it could have
So it
sold really
just sold,
quickly.
probably within a month because
Yeah,
I had a whole shelf of similar, sculptures like that.
right.
So yeah.
Really, really interesting. Oh, Robert, you're such a fascinating
Oh
man
well,
to
thank
talk
you.
to.
It's been really nice talking to you too. Yeah, I feel like we're kindred spirits here in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Kind of feel like that too. I absolutely enjoyed our conversation. And thank you so much for being on the episode today. I've really enjoyed hearing your knowledge about cryptozoology and monsters and mysteries. It's just been pretty exciting. I've enjoyed
Well, it's
it.
been my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank Robert so much for taking us south of the border with this fascinating journey. Honestly, for me personally, it's only made me more curious and interested to find out more and to want to visit these areas for myself once we can travel. Be sure and check out Robert's website, www.mexicounexplained.com, for more information on the cryptids, legends, and monsters we've discussed today, or go and purchase his books, Mexico Unexplained and Mexican Monsters. Both are a great read and are available from most online retailers. I've read them and found them so fascinating. One of the great things about doing this podcast is that I get to read some amazing books written by some of my guests. I love it. I love it. Just a word about most of the episodes in this series and the first few in season 8. Most of the interviews for the episodes were recorded before Christmas. This was because I'm currently dealing with some family issues that require me to be available for my particular family member, so I didn't want our podcast to be disrupted or to suffer. I generally try and record 3 episodes in advance as a general rule to allow for sickness or some emergency situation, so the podcast is covered and there's no disruption for you, my listeners. However, because of this situation, I worked really hard and recorded most of this season's guests, with the exception of a couple of the episodes before Christmas. That's why Robert was referring to 2020 in parts of the conversation. What I do then is I edit our conversation and I record the intro and closing remarks before I upload them in queue for your listening. That's also why there's a discrepancy in the sound quality between the intro and the conversations with my guests. My old computer was dying when these were recorded, and I had to get a new one whose sound is so much better. Today's bumper music is called Mexican from Texas Brother. I want to mention my patrons and thank them for their ongoing support of this podcast. If you want to become a patron of the show, then head over to patreon.com/MCC15 and sign up now. As a patron, you get access to a special members-only page on the podcast website, www.walkingtheshadowlands.com, from which you can download full transcripts of each episode. You also have access to some interview bits that may not make the episodes and little extras as I have time to create and add them for you. You also get early access to the shows before everyone else gets to hear them. Also, you have my absolute gratitude and appreciation. So, what are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/MCC15 and sign up now. The continued support of my patrons makes it possible for me to financially cover part of the cost of producing this show for you. So thank you all so much. If you have any suggestions for topics you might like me to cover in upcoming episodes, then please don't hesitate to contact me. Or if any of you have any questions, suggestions, or any comments that you'd like to make, or experiences that you might like to share with myself or my audience. Or if you feel you might be a good fit as a guest on my podcast, then just email me at shadowlands@yahoo.com or check out the Be a Guest page on the podcast website. Check out our Facebook page, Walking the Shadowlands, our Instagram feed of the same name, and our Twitter feed at Shadowlands10. Like and follow for hints on our upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a positive rating and don't be shy to leave a written review on your chosen podcasting platform or on the podcast Facebook page, Walking the Shadowlands. And of course, so you don't miss out on any episode, make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. This podcast is available on all free podcasting platforms and iHeartRadio as well. Also, if you have Alexa, simply say these 4 words: open Walking the Shadowlands, and Alexa will play our latest episode for you. If you don't have a smartphone, then you can listen to the episodes from the podcast website, www.walkingtheshadowlands.com. For those hearing impaired, there's a full written transcript of each episode on the website, so you don't miss out at all. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your workmates about our show. Encourage them to listen and to subscribe also. The more, the merrier. Thanks for listening to this episode. Ka kite ano, oia koi. I'll see you again.
Thanks for listening.